Okay, good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Duncan Kerr and I'm chairing the meeting. Before we just start, I will say I'm just going to change the agenda around slightly. Item 16 on your agenda we shall take after item 6 on your agenda. Okay, with that, I think we've got one apology from Sharon Ritchie and we're joined by Harry Hancock-Davis as a substitute member to the committee. Also joined by Roger Evans, the portfolio holder, Avtar Sohal from External Audit as well. So with that, I don't think we've got any, just moving on to the next item, any disclosable pecuniary interest from anyone? No? Okay, we move on to the minutes. Can I have a mover for the minutes? Okay, moved by Kate. Is there a seconder? Moved by Nigel. And just have a show of hands to approve the minutes. That's magnificent. Thank you for that. Don't think we've got any public questions or indeed any member questions. Given the length of the agenda, that's probably quite fortuitous. So we'll move on to the first line of assurance, which is the internal control management update. Now we're joined by the Chief Executive, Tanya, and the Leader of the Council as well, Heather. I'm going to hand over to them to present the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. So my name is Tanya Miles. I'm the Interim Chief Executive. This report provides an initial response to the limited assurance opinion of the Chief Audit Executive for the year ending 24-25 and sets out the steps that myself as the Interim Chief Executive and the Leader of Shropshire Council are taken to strengthen the Council's framework for governance, risk and internal control. For context, just under half, that's 47%, of all audit recommendations made during 24-25 were due to significant and fundamental issues identified across the 60 reports issued in that year. For further context, this committee will be aware the LGA commenced a corporate peer challenge in the summer of this year. We had 10 recommendations, of which included one around governance and concerns around limited assurance. Following my appointment as the Interim Chief Exec on the 22nd of September this year, we have now had fortnightly statutory officer meetings, which includes the Chief Executive, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Monitoring Officer. This also includes the Chief Audit Executive. Progression has been made on several key actions and work to strengthen corporate governance. This includes overseeing the implementation of all internal audit recommendation amongst other governance priorities. Other progress that has been made since September. I meet with the Senior Leadership Forum every Thursday during the month of October and November, making it very clear the expectations that this council has on every single employee in terms of governance. And committee would have seen the letter that I also sent out to all staff. All staff received an email from myself on the 9th of October regarding compliance with the council's constitution, policies and procedures. This committee will be aware that this week we have published our improvement plan and also our people plan. The people plan focuses on culture, leadership and talent, capability and capacity. We have held our first independently chaired improvement board has been established, and they first met on the 10th of November, and the minutes of that meeting have been published this week. There's been a review of all strategic risks with officer workshop that commenced on the 18th of November, and there's further workshops planned. I'm pleased to say in the last 4 weeks, we have now halved the number of FOIs overdue by more than 40 days. And in terms of the audit outstanding actions, which was sitting at 181 4 weeks ago, is now 33. I hope this gives committee assurance of the actions that both myself and the leader have taken. We take this extremely seriously. We are receiving weekly monitor updates, and I am confident, committee, that we will get back to a more assured position. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Do you have any questions for the leader of the Chief Executive? Yes, Councillor.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned about...
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, yes, Malcolm Marshook, Councillor for Priest. You talked about things like freedom of information coming down, which is great. But I'm just wondering, are there any sort of overview measures of success that we're looking to track? So how do we know overall as a council that we're going in the right way and that we can see we're going in the right way?
Thanks for that question. I now receive a weekly report which talks to me about the over 40 days, and that's been my focus over the last 4 weeks. We've got a target to reduce that down by no more than 30 days by December the 15th, and then by March to have nothing over more than 20 days.
Thank you, Councillor. Kate Halliday.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. I do recognise that both the leader and the interim chief exec are relatively new to this role, and this is a kind of long-term endemic problem. And in fact, I believe that the last chief exec never attended this meeting in his term. I could be wrong, but it's certainly not in previous years. So it's a step forward, and it is reassuring to know that we're already seeing these improvements. Clearly, it's very worrying that the ongoing issues that seem to be, both operational but also there's a kind of a cultural level. There's been a cultural problem within the organisation, and I guess a feeling that audit is somewhere separate off something you kind of have to participate in. If someone turns up, not always, you don't always have to participate, because I know we don't always get full compliance. So it's really good to hear. I've noticed myself that audit is being mentioned in staff briefings, and it's good to hear. It's surprising to hear that the meetings that you discuss with all the key leads haven't been happening, and that does explain perhaps why we haven't tackled audit. I think, going forward as an audit committee, we're going to need to really closely monitor this situation, because part of our problem is that we have had lots of reassurances, not from the chief exec in this instance, but we are told that action plans are being made, and we are told that there will be improvement, and that there were reasons why things weren't good and they're going to improve. So I think we need to monitor this situation very closely as an audit committee. And also, I just wonder how well staff understand the role, and I'm not necessarily talking about leadership, but staff within the organisation understand the role of audit and the importance of it, because it's not just about someone coming and checking up and you have to answer questions and take time out of their day. The value for money side of audit might make the difference in their team between getting a new staff member to help them, and I'm not sure how well staff within the organisation understand all this. So it's a question there about how we can change the culture, not just at the top, but also within staff within the organisation who make the council run. It's up to them. How they perform is everything to the council.
So thank you for that. So we would absolutely welcome this audit committee monitoring the progress. As I said, both the leader and I now receive weekly updates on both audit activity as well as FOIs, and I think it would be right and proper for this committee to also receive on how regularly you would like to in terms of the monitoring. I think for us, it's been about setting expectations around the importance of both audit and FOIs. We have had a number of meetings now with our senior leadership team. You have seen the letter that I have sent out to all staff, reminding them all that they're public servants, and we're all accountable to the residents on the street in terms of how we spend public money. We've had conversations, Barry and I, and Head of Audit, in terms of what next. And I think people have often been quite scared of audit and seen it as quite draconian, and we want to change that. We want to really change the approach and the understanding of audit. So we've got some ideas around how we're going to do that. But as you say, Kate, it's not about just at senior officer level, it's getting it right down to all staff across the organisation.
Any other questions? So, hand up, Duncan.
Yes.
Okay.
Duncan, can I just add?
Yes, by all means.
I think the importance of the FOIs and so on, it's not just about the public, but actually if you don't get those FOIs dealt with, we have increased complaints, and then we have a capacity issue within the organisation anyway. So there are whole lots of linkages here that actually just stem from one action. So it's really important that we get those sorted, and also the right communication, so that when somebody's already asked a question in FOI, that they get a link direct to the website where they can see the answer that's already there. It saves time, it deals with things much more quickly. So there's a whole lot of work going on around this, not least to get the number of complaints down as well.
Thank you for that. Just from my point of view, and I think trying to be balanced about this, we're very appreciative of the work that's been done. We're very pleased that it's happening. But on the other side, this is now November, and this committee asked to see you in May. And I know there's been a change of personnel since then, but that's a long time for the committee to take action on this. This was a matter which was referred to in the external auditor's previous recommendations from previous years of limited assurance, and we failed to produce an action plan. So I suppose my question is, are we confident that we're progressing at the right speed? Because I think we've got to a stage, I have to say, which most people would assume was the norm for our council, but we're going to have to go much beyond that, because it's one thing to tap back where actions have been made and not yet implemented. It's another thing to get to this section that's not been looked at by internal audit for many years and is due to be looked at, and to see whether their practices have also improved, because they won't have had the attention of having already had an inspection. So a bit of a complicated question, but I suppose another bit is, are we improving at the right speed to meet the requirements of those who are looking at us, forming judgments about us, and whose that judgment has huge implications for both ourselves and our residents.
Well, I guess in terms of speed, in the last 4 weeks, we've halved the number of FOIs. So on the 30th of October, we had 57 more than 40 days. It's now down to 28. And as I said earlier, in terms of the outstanding actions on audits, it was 181 4 weeks ago. It's now 33. So I don't think we could challenge in terms of the speed over the last 4 weeks, but I do accept the challenge around how do we ensure that this is consistent, and it's got to be consistent. But also this is around getting on top of the outstanding actions and overdue. We need to get into the prevention space, don't we? Around how do we support our staff to be compliant with this council's governance? And that's the work that we absolutely need to do. So there's two parts. One is around getting grip, making sure that the overdue actions have been completed, but also around how we prevent there being any further fundamental and significant audits.
Okay. Yes, I think that's absolutely right. So we have a recommendation somewhere in the report, I'm sure, that we are asked to note with appropriate comment the positive feedback and action has been undertaken to strengthen the governance of the council, and consider future updates for Leader and Chief Executive to attend Audit and Governance Committee to discuss the improvement plan and progress to date. I'm happy to move those. I'd like to add to those that the point that has really just been made, which is we would like to see in the improvement plans going forward how we move out from looking at just compliance, where we've had historic issues and identified them, into changing the culture so we prevent, in your words, Tanya, which I think is entirely appropriate, going in, because the early indications, I have to say, from internal audit's work this year is that we are not improving. In fact, it's a deterioration in the judgments that have been made so far. So we've got a lot of work to do in that space, it seems to me. So I hope that makes some sense. Is there a seconder for that motion? Yeah, Malcolm seconds it. Can we have a vote on that then, please? Thank you. That's lovely. Okay, we then move on then to item 16, which is on the external audit, and I've been in James and Avdar, no doubt, will speak as well.
Thanks, Chair. So item 16 is the annual, the auditor's annual report. So this is a report that is brought forward to Audit Committee on a regular basis each year, and the report last year included two key recommendations. This year that has been expanded. There is now a statutory recommendation, which will be the focus, I would imagine, of the conversations to follow. But there are also three key recommendations and two improvement recommendations listed within the report as well. So the cover report really just takes you through what those key issues are, and that strategic recommendation. Management responses have been added to that. I think in terms of the statutory recommendation, there's nothing new in the sense of what's been identified. It's not unexpected in that sense. That's not to take away from the seriousness of this recommendation and the need to deal with the issues that this raises. What I think we can point to, which links back to the points just made by the Chief Exec and the leader, is that we have a lot of these plans in place to deal with these issues and the issues raised in the statutory recommendation within our existing improvement planning process. So with the independently chaired improvement board that we have in place, but also with the improvement plan that we are taken to Cabinet and through to Council over the next few weeks. There'll also be a revised medium-term financial strategy, which will, by February, have picked up all of the issues identified within the statutory recommendation in particular. And we'll pick out a way in which we can set ourselves on the path towards a sustainable financial position. The first part, of course, will be getting ourselves into a stable financial position, and that will require exceptional financial support to take us through that. But as part of that MTFS, a revised capital strategy, there's also a pre-budget report that we'll be going through as well, which tries to sort of reset the position ahead of those papers going through to February Council. So I'll hand over to
just say something before you do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, but just before we hand over, I'll talk about it, a little bit of process. So we're in a statutory situation where the recommendation has legal implications, and I think I probably need to make you aware of those. So Schedule 7 of the regulation says that at the meeting, and we must hold a meeting in 30 days, the relevant authority must decide whether the report requires the authority to take any action or whether the recommendation is to be accepted, and what, if any, action to take in response to the report or recommendation. Now, I need to make it clear that I should be moving that this determination is done by Council. It's not a remit of the Audit Committee to do that, but we can comment on it and we can advise Council on it. So I will certainly be moving that this is referred to the Council to consider whether they accept these recommendations, and secondly, what action should be taken. We are in a very serious situation. Statutory recommendations are not common, they are rare, and it reflects on the gravity of the issues that we are facing and as an authority. So with that, I hand over to Avdar.
Thank you, Chair. So in the last audit committee I came to, we presented a letter around the financial position, and we've just kind of identified that we might issue statutory recommendations. At that point in time, we were doing our value for money work, and I think the new financial information that was coming out at that time did indicate that actually the financial position of the council through the work that was going on was worsening in terms of what's been uncovered in terms of the reviews, etc. So taking that into mind, we decided that actually it would be best to issue a statutory recommendation now as part of our value for money reporting. When we issue a statutory recommendation, it's not solely my judgment. So it does go through a panel process within the Grant Thornton firm to agree that am I being too harsh, am I being too, you know, soft, etc. So we've had that consultation before we bring a statutory recommendation to you know, in our reporting. So as James has alluded to, there's nothing actually new in terms of what we've uncovered in terms of the statutory recommendation, but we do want to add that voice around. It is a you know, a severe position. It's something that, you know, the council really must address seriously. Just to give context, this year across Grant Thornton, we've raised about 10 statutory recommendations across the number of bodies we work across, and so we audit around 200 bodies. So it's a, you know, it's a very small percent, but that number is increasing compared to previous years. I've got Jonathan with me, who wrote most of the report, so he's going to go through some of the detailed findings now.
Yeah, thank you, Avatar. And yeah, as Avatar mentioned, a lot of the report is focused on the financial challenges facing the council, which are significant, but the report does also raise some wider concerns around financial sustainability and the governance arrangements in place at the council. And as mentioned previously, we've raised a further 3 key recommendations and 2 improvement recommendations alongside the statutory recommendation raised. So I'll talk through each of the areas in a bit more detail now. So with regards to the statutory recommendation, as has previously been mentioned, we've exercised our powers under the Local Audit and Accountability Act to issue a statutory recommendation in relation to the financial sustainability, overall financial position of the council, and financial governance in the budget setting process and financial monitoring process. So I'll address each of these in turn. So the council delivered a £34.2 million overspend in 24-25. This overspend deteriorated significantly between the month 11 and month 12 reporting, predominantly due to a £15 million deterioration in the adult social care outturn position. Following this outturn, an internal audit review was commissioned, and this identified that there were a number of failings in the financial monitoring and reporting process, failings that could have been addressed and would have more proactively identified that overspend and enabled a more proactive approach to managing the year-end overspend position. The failures here have made a direct contribution to the financial challenges facing the council, as the outturn position for 24-25 and the deterioration in it placed increased pressure on the reserves position of the council, which has subsequently reduced its financial resilience to support the financial challenges that the council continues to face. So moving into the current year 25-26, given the financial position of the council, there remains, in our view, a real risk that a Section 114 notice may need to be required, and there is a dependency on the external, the exceptional financial support from MHCLG to support the council's financial position. The forecast overspend at month 6 is circa £47 million, which exceeds the general fund reserves balance of £34 million. Again, there's been a deterioration in the 25-26 forecast outturn position over the past few months, from the month 4 position to the current figure. And again, there is a real risk that as a result of this, the council would be in an unlawful position without that additional financial support from MHCLG. In addition to the immediate financial challenges, the medium-term financial outlook of the council remains challenging. At the 25-26 budget setting process, a cumulative gap of £138 million by 2030-31 was shown in the MTFS. This position will have deteriorated given the current financial challenges, and the medium term remains the challenge as well as the immediate term for the council. So if you see on page 12 of our report, details of our statutory recommendation, and I will read this out. So we've raised sort of 4 key areas, and as James mentioned previously, the management responses have been given with regards to this, but we recommend that the council continues at pace to address the financial challenges it faces, including an immediate review of all services, both statutory and non-statutory, to identify the cost of a minimum viable service provision to deliver its statutory responsibilities. This will enable the council to understand the scale of its structural deficit between the cost of services and the income available to the council. And that should give the council an understanding of the immediate decisions and savings that can be delivered, replicating actions that would be taken were the council to issue a Section 114 notice. We also recommend that the council reviews all estimates and modelling that feed into the development of the budget, and I know that work has been ongoing on that, and that has been some part of the contribution to the deterioration in the financial outturn for 25-26 over the last couple of months. And this should enable the council to mitigate variances in actuals compared to budget, resulting from any over-optimism in assumptions. We also recommend the council should develop a realistic and deliverable plan over the medium term as to how exceptional financial support will support increased financial resilience, and how the council will reduce reliance on this support to reach a financially sustainable position. It's key to know that exceptional financial support should be exceptional in nature, and the council should have a clear plan on how to move to a more financial sustainable position, increasing resilience and reduce reliance on these temporary sources of support. And then we also recommend that the internal audit recommendations with regards to budget monitoring and reporting should be immediately actioned, and we note that again action has been taken with regards to this. So that is our statutory recommendation, and as outlined previously, there are responsibilities for the council to address this statutory recommendation given the nature of it. What I will now touch on now is the other areas of the report where we've raised concerns and key recommendations with regards to the council's arrangements for securing value for money. So the first area is around a significant weakness in relation to the savings delivery and the impact that has on financial sustainability. And we do note from our work that the quantum of savings the council has delivered in recent financial years has been significant, the value of it. However, it has not been at the level required to deliver against a plan that was set out when setting the budget. So, for example, if we take 24-25, savings target of £90 million was required. The council delivered at 52% of that, which is £47 million, which is a significant figure in itself, but is only 42% of the requirement and relieves 48% undelivered, which again places financial pressure on the council. Again, in 25-26, the budget, the savings requirement is just shy of £60 million, and expected delivery is around 57%. Again, £33-34 million is a significant figure in itself, but again is well below the level required to deliver a balanced deliver against the budget that was set out at the start of the year. This over-ambition and under-delivery in the savings proposals has significantly increased the pressure on the council's financial resilience. In previous years, it's required the utilisation of reserves, which has led to the general fund reserves reaching its current level, which has reduced the overall level available to support financial sustainability. And for 25-26, the anticipated under-delivery directly contributes to the forecast overspend that places the council in its current financial position. So on that basis, we've raised a key recommendation that's detailed on page 13 of our report around the council's approach to its savings identification and savings delivery. So moving forwards onto the next key recommendation, which is with regards to the dedicated schools grant deficit. So I will note at the start that the dedicated school grants deficit issue is not unique to Shropshire. It is a national issue that needs a resolution by central government, but that does not take away from the fact that there's been a significant increase in the dedicated schools grants deficit in Shropshire over the past couple of years. So at the end of 2024-25, the cumulative deficit was just over £17 million, which in year had increased by £15 million. And also in 25-26, there's a forecast increase of another £19 million, which would take the cumulative deficit to just shy of £37 million. So whilst the statutory override is in place, and I know yesterday there was some news in the budget around future DSG deficits, the risk remains that the statutory override is uncertain in sort of how these deficits will be dealt with by central government. And given the overall financial sustainability and available general reserves to the council, there remains a real financial risk. This is a firm-wide approach we take at Grant Thornton with regards to raising a significant weakness in key recommendation where dedicated school grants have increased rapidly and exceed levels of available general fund reserves. So we've raised a key recommendation around the council continuing to drive forward its approach to mitigating the growth of the deficit, and regularly reporting the impact that is having and trying to mitigate any growth in the deficit between now and the end of the statutory override period. So that covers off our key recommendations, statutory recommendations with regards to financial sustainability. We've also raised a key recommendation in relation to governance, and this touches on the report that was previously presented by the Chief Executive on the limited assurance rating for an internal audit. When we came to Audit Committee last year, we reported this issue as a improvement recommendation and made the recommendation for the council to put in an action plan to address the limited assurance opinions from internal audit. In 24-25 and subsequently part of what we've not seen that improvement. And as a result, we've increased and upgraded the issue to a key recommendation and a significant weakness in arrangements. So 24-25 will be the 6th year of limited assurance rating from the head of internal audit, and our view is that this limited assurance opinion on the internal control environment is indicative of failures in the council to address the issues raised. And there's a direct contribution between these issues and a weakness in the internal control environment and the financial challenges facing the council. For example, the issue with regards to budget monitoring is indicative of a weakness in control environment, and therefore there's a direct link between this issue and the issues the council is facing from a financial perspective. As we've seen no improvement, as I said, we've raised it to a key recommendation and set out the recommendation here, but we note that the report and the action that's been taken already by the council with regards to that. So in addition to those weaknesses, the key recommendations, we've identified 2 significant weaknesses. One is around an improvement in the capital reporting, just to increase the granularity of reporting on slippage of capital programmes and the implications that has on the financial position of the council. And the second one is with regards to the LGA peer review and the recommendations raised in that review. We're not repeating the recommendations they're making, but we've raised a recommendation that the council should have an action plan, and we note again that action has been taken. So just to conclude, so there's no doubt that the findings in our report are significant, and the financial challenge facing the council is precarious in nature, but we must acknowledge the steps that have already been taken by the council to address the challenge and improve the financial position. These are detailed in the management responses and the comments from management. For example, the spend control panels that have been implemented, the improvement plan that is scheduled to go to Cabinet, and the improvement board that's been established are all signs of positive action from the council and are commendable. But the scale of the financial challenge remains significant, both in the immediate term and in the medium term. And this reflects in the findings of our report as detailed. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Okay, just before I bring anybody else in, it is a very sobering moment for the council, and particularly worrying that you state very clearly that our poor corporate governance performance has impacted directly on our financial situation, and that is obviously a extreme concern to the council and its residents. So I go to Duncan, then Kate, and then Malcolm.
Thank you. I heard all 3 say there's nothing new here, but there is quite a bit new here, I think. I just want to go back to the minutes of our September meeting when I said this refers to something I raised that says a query was raised about the status of significant weaknesses and recommendations from the previous year's audit. The engagement lead clarified that while recommendations were made regarding financial sustainability, the worsening position meant ongoing audit work was needed to assess the council's response. My concern then was that actually the recommendations that had been made previously by external audit really didn't get to the nub of the problem. We now come to the evidence in the latest one, and you say there's nothing new, but evidence. The internal audit review commissioned by the Chief Executive, the new Chief Executive, identified that the causes of the unanticipated deterioration in the forecast outturn between month 11 and month 12 of 2024-25 included incorrect application of financial assumptions and monitoring, lack of clear communication between finance and adult social care, missed opportunities to identify overspend earlier, and lack of reporting on actuals that would be identified the issue. So my question is, why wasn't this spotted before? Why has this now come leaping out of us in this report? None of this came up before. It's come up as a result of the LGA review and the latest actions. None of this happened between month 11 and month 12. This is obviously a cultural and endemic issue that needs tackling. So what needs to be done about that, and why has this never come up before, that there are these weaknesses in the reporting processes within the organisation?
Able to answer that, or?
Yeah.
Want to speak?
Go on, James.
So I think it was a unique situation. We went into the 24-25 financial year with £62.5 million worth of savings to be delivered. And with the brought forwards and other mitigations, that became the 90 million figure that's been quoted. So this was an unprecedented level of savings to be delivered over that financial year. It wasn't until around about June, July that we got clarity on what the actual level for that year would be, including all the brought forwards when we closed down the 23-24 accounts. And at the same time, we were developing a new set of monitoring dashboards and approaches that would enable us to get much better visibility of the way in which we were managing our savings and monitoring our financial position. That continued to develop over the year, and there was, when we got to the end of the year and a reconciliation between all of those items, those different kind of dashboards, which were supposed to provide a single version of the truth, what it identified was that there was actually a discrepancy in that reconciliation and the way in which some of the savings had been treated in terms of those two different systems had created an anomaly, and that's what was picked up. That was then dealt with at the end of the year in the ways that we've discussed at Audit Committee. It was in the first meeting in June, I think it was. It was only following that that the former chief executive then requested an internal audit review to go into that in more detail and understand what that was. That review was done, and the management action as a response to that was picked up then by the interim chief executive when she came into post. So that report is now included within today's agenda. So in terms of the timing, it was not known as at April this year. We did not know the situation existed. It was only in May that this came to light through that reconciliation to get us through to the outturn position. It was so serious that it meant we had to change a lot of the way in which we worked to get that outturn position in. So that's where the focus was, to make sure that we had a set of accounts that balanced at the end of the year, and we had to call out all the stops to enable us to do that. And it was following that we then undertook an objective, no holds barred review of that situation so that we could then learn from it. But we didn't want to just be firefighting and then kind of go, right, well, we've solved it now, so let's move on. So that's taken a little bit of time to get that through. Unfortunately, the way that the audit committee deadlines have fallen, that report, due to the change in the chief executives, that report wasn't ready to be considered in September. So that's not really an explanation that justifies, that's just an explanation in terms of setting out what we were working through at that time, and happy for you to take whatever conclusions you want from that.
I'll move on, Kate.
Thank you. Yes, kind of following on from that question actually, which is, it sounds like in layman's terms, and correct me if I'm wrong, you went to service managers, said how much savings can you make in this financial year, and they gave you a figure of, let's say, £50,000. Then what happened throughout the year, and as we got to the end of the financial year, there was an assumption that that £50,000 was going to be saved, and the actuals, i.e. the actual figure, wasn't fed into the budgeting and the monitoring process. That's a real concern for me. That worries me, in that, that there's two counts, aren't there? There's a lot of service managers are social workers, are not from a business background. If you ask them how much they can save, they'll, so I guess there's something about the risk assessment process around that, but there's also not including actuals in our overall budgeting, because that, like, you know, you don't always achieve what you want to get through the year. Sometimes you do better, sometimes you do worse, but you need an up-to-date system. So I guess that there's that, and then also, you know, when we discussed this, I think it was at the last meeting, you explained what had happened and also said, and you reassured us. I think I asked, how do we know it's not going to happen again? And we spoke about the spending boards, which I believe are beginning to reap some rewards. But I guess part of my problem is it is beginning to happen again, and I'm sure there are reasons why. But I suspect that's why we've got the statutory. One of the reasons why we've got the statutory recommendation, in that there's a pattern of being reassured and then things worsening. So I guess in terms of that, I think as an audit committee, I'll probably speak more than once in this item, because I think I'm going to make some suggestions at the end about what we can do. I think we need to, it is difficult to seek reassurance, because when we do, we're told that things are okay or we've got a plan. And they seem to then deteriorate. So that's our problem as a committee, I think.
Yeah, Owen.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. So I'm not going to disagree with that. I think just a couple of points within that. Fully accept the point that was raised around we don't pick up actuals within our projections and within our assessments. We don't report on those. Those actuals are there. They're sat within the system, obviously. We, as an organisation, though, for as long as I can remember, we haven't reported on those actuals, and we haven't had this situation. So we've identified. I think what it comes down to is the new approach that we were taking, and a whole new set of systems. And within that, the example you gave there of 50,000, the problem was that there was a line allocated to several million. And so that was one line in the accounts, and it was a very, very significant line within the accounts. So were savings being delivered? Yes. Were those savings then being accounted for within the bottom line? Yes. Some of those were cost avoidance. Some of those were actual reductions in spend. Were they then being allocated against this one particular cost centre? No. And that's what it was. So in a sense, it was a very basic error, very basic issue, but it had fundamental implications in relation to the outturn position. So in terms of assurance around lessons learned, this is the reason why the period 6 and the period 7 position has deteriorated. It's not through design. It was not what we wanted. But what we had to make sure was, once we'd completed that internal audit review, which was at the end of September, early October time, we were then in the position of period 6 monitoring, quarter 2. So we'd already taken on board those lessons learned from that. And so as we did the quarter 2 monitoring, we were going through line by line to ensure that these things were not happening. And we found that in some cases they were. And that's part of the lessons learned. So I think I said this previously, but it feels, sort of counterintuitive in a sense, but you can take assurance from the fact that we've identified these things at period 6 and period 7. Because that, from my point of view, I needed assurance that I wouldn't get to the end of this financial year and find ourselves in a situation where we would have a significant variation from our projected outturn position. So I needed the assurance that the organisation was dealing with this issue. And part of the assurance I can take from that is that some of those things have been identified at period 6 and period 7. And to the credit of those staff involved, have openly then reported those, had those discussions, and it has come out in the public domain. It's not easy for all of these things to come out. It's painful to kind of work through these issues, but it's better to have those things out in the open.
And just if I could just follow, and the point about how we predict savings in terms of going to managers and asking, have there been other plans to improve that? So
if I can, Chair. So we have brought much closer working together between the various teams. we are in the process at the moment of looking at so in terms of the current year, financial year, yes, we've done that. We've ensured that people are working together closely on that. We're very clear about the savings that have been identified and have gone through each of those to clarify that position. You'll see there's now only a very small number of savings that are shown as amber. The majority are either not delivered or are delivered or in delivery, and so we've clarified that. So we've removed some of that ambiguity that's in the middle. As part of the 26/7 budget setting process, which links directly back to one of the points within the statutory recommendation, the Chief Executive has already said, I do not want a position where we have savings next year that are not 100% delivered. So whatever we put on the table, we have a plan to deliver that 100%. I would go further than that in the sense that because we are taking a longer term view now, we're looking beyond the 26/27 financial year. We're looking into 27/28 and beyond. I think the reality is that we'll be looking to try and deliver 100% of those savings in year, but we will also be trying to get ahead of the curve in terms of those later savings and get the plans in place to deliver those. And it may be that we're able to bring some of that forward as a result of that. The proof will be in the pudding, but there's a lot of work, as the Chief Executive and the Leader have referred to, a lot of work with senior managers to ensure that everybody is really in the right space and that culture is changing around our expectation as an organisation of what should be being put forward and what should be being delivered.
I'm thinking in a moment, Malcolm, I just want to add a sort of supplementary comment to that, if that's okay. Clearly, you can give assurance to the committee that actuals will be used going forward in future, but I want to also address this issue of optimism bias, which is in the statutory recommendation. And what I want to suggest to you is that when managers come forward with their budget proposals and savings proposals, what is the due diligence? What is the gateway check? What is the process that ensures this committee and ensures the council that there's not optimism bias in those proposals right at the outset?
So in response to that, there's a lot of work that we are doing around the programme management of our savings proposals. So what we've done in previous years is we've identified plans for delivery, identified areas where we can make savings with a focus on getting those out for public consultation as soon as we possibly can, so in December, and consulting on those ideas, and then on the back of that working through the plans. Well, by the time we're at that point, we're into delivery, and so those plans then take time to work through, put together, and in some cases those plans didn't get delivered or focused. So what we're looking to do this year is, from the public consultation and the budget setting point of view, we haven't actually set out what those savings proposals are yet, because we're working through in much more detail in terms of the delivery plans that will follow those. This is all linked through into the improvement plan, and this will be overseen by the improvement board. So I'm much more confident that the organisation will pick up that message in a much stronger way than it has previously. So what we will see instead is public consultation that's focused more on these are the ideas and themes in terms of where we would take the organisation, rather than getting approval for an individual specific kind of idea and then working through the plan of that idea should it be implemented by the administration at the February budget setting. So we're trying to put more process, more due diligence, as you rightly say, into that before we get to the budget setting position in February. So by February 2026, when council sees a savings plan, say an MTFS with savings targets, I think what you'll see is a much more modest savings target for 26/7, because there is a need to absolutely get a grip on that process and ensure that everything we're putting forward will be delivered. At the moment, we've got a set of ideas that are coming through that haven't been discussed in detail with Cabinet yet. So these are ideas that are coming forward. But what we don't have at this point in time is clarity on exactly, are these cashable savings? Are these going to take money out of this area, this area, this area? Are they going to be avoiding growth and mitigating that growth into the future? So we're really trying to bottom down each of these proposals as far as we possibly can.
And again, just to comment on that, I think it would help greatly if there was transparency that there had been some sort of third-party check on each business case that delivers proposals for savings. So we can have reliance not just on the manager saying they can deliver the savings, but somebody independently, I don't know who that would be, but somebody independently to some standard across the organisation has guaranteed that that is a robust assessment. And the world's not perfect, but at least there will be a robust process. And I think that's something we'd like to see. Sorry, Malcolm. And then I've been dawning at the back.
Yeah, thank you. I've two observations on the report. The first one is, the report is titled Annual Report ending 31st of March 2025. Most of the evidence in there is up to October 2025. So for me, it feels like two reports mashed together. It's last year's report and almost a sort of half-year current interim report. I've got no problem with that, but the fact that they're sort of mashed together and trip over each other is a problem. That's my first point. My second point is on the recommendations, statutory and the key recommendations. Again, not downplaying the seriousness of them and so on. But again, they feel a bit after the event. The council declared the financial emergency more than 2 months ago and put in a series of actions. And now we get the auditor coming in saying, oh, you should declare a financial emergency and put in these actions. So it's all a bit retrospective. That's my two.
To comment on the issue about the data from this year that's included in the report for last year.
Okay, so when we do these reports, we look at the financial year. So we are auditing 24-25, but we also have to look at what's happened after that event as well, that period of time. And given the seriousness of the financial situation, as auditors, we've also got that responsibility to actually report on what is going on at this current moment in time. And therefore, when we were doing our work on the value for money work, we know this was all going on. So we've chosen to put all of that reporting into this auditor's annual report as the vehicle to present our situation. In terms of, I can appreciate that you're saying that this is coming after the event, but we are only made aware of situations at a point in time where these, the financial outturn positions are coming to us at that time. And at that time, we have to then, formulate our response to this. So it does take a while before we can actually bring a formal report to you. So, for instance, we knew the situation, was in terms of finances was getting worse, but we've had to go through a series of consultations, including with management, including with others in Grant Thornton, including other stakeholders, before we can actually legally release this report. And that's why there is a bit of a delay in terms of when we've actually presented these statutory recommendations.
Join us and find a microphone. Introduce yourself.
Thank you for letting me speak, Chair. I'm Dawn Huseman. I'm the Vice Chair of the Transformation and Infrastructure Overview Scrutiny Committee, amongst other things. I have concerns about the savings levels. As did Grant Thornton, it's clear from the audit report and from other discussions, the budget forum, etc., that the savings identified are unrealistic. Many are undelivered, and potentially the remaining ones are undeliverable. Now, that doesn't take away from the amazing efforts of the organisation in what they have managed to achieve. My concern is about what was identified and is remaining. These savings are what was identified by the work carried out by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I have repeatedly asked for sight of this work. Grant Thornton recommended in their audit report that the outputs of this work are reviewed and any savings that can be implemented now are identified. I suggest that more than that, I say that we actually need sight of the PwC transformational recommendations. We need to be able to challenge these. Are they realistic? What's the work value for money? And what can be learned from this? And I'd like to ask, is this something that audit would be able to look into? Thank you, Chair.
And I think the leader maybe I'll speak about this, that there was a request on the improvement board to actually review the outcomes from the PwC work. You also see it's a key recommendation here of the council review the outputs for the PwC transformation work and identify initiatives that can be implemented at pace to support savings delivery. I don't know what's happened, but just I'm not up to date what's happened to that recommendation from the improvement board. I don't know whether the chief executive or leader can speak to that, but I'm sure it's been developed somewhere.
Yes, I mean, we are doing, we need to see them because it became clear, as Dawn says at the budget forum, that actually many of the red rated savings, all of which had no plans behind them, were put forward by PwC. So we have requested for that to happen. The LGA is coming in to do a whole look at best value around all of that. So the work will be ongoing, will be happening. I think when that sort of money is invested in work, we need to be open and transparent and see exactly how well that was spent and whether it was value for money for us for the future. So yes, it's ongoing.
Okay, Carl?
Councillor Carl Riley, St Martins. Thanks, Chair. A couple of points for me, really. Whilst I agree with what Duncan said to us, there isn't really any major surprises for me. There's obviously concerns over our own internal audit and limited insurance over the last 6 years, and hopefully that's going to get better. But one of the major problems with spending that there's always been identified is adult and child social care. But we're now, Grant Thornton has made reference to the DSG, the dedicated schools fund, and this never really hasn't really, or I don't believe has come up as a problem. And I am concerned where we're currently at 17.6 million deficit, that might grow by another 19 million next year. And that is a real worry, but there's a question really to you, James. You may not be able to answer this today, maybe another time. But what is really driving that deficit? Because unless I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, over many years now in Shropshire, less and less schools are under Shropshire control and more are in trusts that are self-financing, yet this money just keeps on increasing. And that is a worrying figure of an extra 19 million. And that's my first point.
I can just provide some commentary around that. So the dedicated schools grant comes into Shropshire and is distributed to all schools, including those academy schools, through the DSG formula. And as part of that, there is significant pressures on send and I can't remember the other term. But there's a couple of areas where there's significant pressure within that. I think, as was referenced earlier, this is not unique in Shropshire. And actually, when I speak to colleagues and we talk about where the pressures are within the organisation, there tends to be adult social care, children's social care, and DSG, and around the send deficit, etc. Shropshire has been quite unique, certainly up until last year, where we had a £3 million deficit, in that there was a significant mismatch. So our kind of level of pressure within children's services was significant, was in line with perhaps other authorities, but our DSG deficit was significantly lower. So this is something that I've been expecting would become more of a pressure. Other organisations are talking about multiple millions, hundreds of millions in terms of that deficit. So what we've got and what we're looking to seek approval on is a DSG deficit recovery plan, which will deal with those drivers and take us through to a position where we can manage that deficit going forward. We have the statutory override until March 2028, but what the budget as announced is, while there may be some solution going forward beyond that, the historic element of that may well fall on local authorities. And at the moment, the only mechanism for managing that outside of the statutory override, I'd imagine would be exceptional financial support. So that deficit recovery plan is essential to getting that delivered. I can't give you the detail in terms of what the drivers are, in terms of what that is, but it's fundamentally just a mismatch between the level of demand and need within that area and the level of funding allocated within the formula.
I think we're going to head to.
Sorry, I just wanted to in terms of the DSG. So in terms of the national picture on this, I audited a number of bodies, and Frankwell have done their own sort of survey and analysis on this, and the trend is, worryingly consistent. What's happening with Shropshire? So what we're seeing is most of council's deficit position is now doubling prediction for the next year. So from here, say 17 million plus another 19 million, and getting to that 36 million. We're seeing that happening across the board at the moment. So it does show there is a underlying trend on this deficit growth that is happening, and the only steps we can ask is to have some sort of deficit recovery plan at this point in time, until more certainty comes out in terms of how to deal with the ongoing historic deficits, and what other measures central allocation and central funding will bring in the future.
I intend to, I've got one question to ask about SR1, and then I was going to go to Kate to make some sort of resolution to go forward. This will go to council if we approve that resolution, and there'll be opportunity then to ask questions. But if you really want to come back, by all means do here. My question was just about what's called the minimum viable service provision, which I've not heard as a term before, but it's in SR1, and we are required to identify it to enable us to understand the scale of the structural deficit. And I suppose my question is, are we accepting that recommendation, or what work is going to be done? And can somebody explain to me exactly what it means? Because I'm not too sure. For ourselves, actually, James. Well, you can explain to me.
With regards to what it means, it's asking the council to assess what would the council look like if it delivered the minimum services it had to do by statute, and actually what is it, and then that would enable the council to say, what's our structural deficit? Have we got enough funding to cover our bare minimum of services? Because as we know, and we see it across local authorities, that the significant pressures in adults and social care, which are statutory services, statutory requirements, actually assess what is that minimum viable proposition for the council to be from an expenditure perspective, and then that will enable council to make decisions around what it wants to be as a council in terms of those things that are not statutory in nature. But preventative activity, for example, is critical in reducing costs in social care. So then the council will decide, actually we need to spend money on that, and just it's an exercise to understand what that minimum position would be.
So just to push on this, so could it be that we identify what is statutory and has to be done, what is preventative, doesn't have to be done technically, but is needed to be done to reduce statutory demand, what is discretionary and doesn't and costs the council money, but also what is discretionary and actually makes the council money, because there'd be not much point stopping doing something that's discretionary that actually produces income. So it's like a fourfold. Is that?
You've summarised that pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just more complicated, isn't it, than saying statutory and non-statutory? It's yeah. Okay. Okay. So Kate.
Did you want to make a quick point about something new before? I might wrap it up in my.
Yeah, no, it's probably best I just make a point now, really. So we constantly hear and talk about making savings across the council and stuff, and that sort of thing. But something I feel, and I'm going to make a couple of recommendations that majority of this committee are not going to like, I'm afraid, but I'm going to say them anyway. I think we need to start looking for waste. As a council, we never hear about what waste, where money has been badly spent. And the recommendation that I wanted to make, but I think now, I hope you agree, that maybe now is a time for the opposition parties to get together, and however it's done, whether it's done through a task and finish group, that we commission some sort of DOE-style internal audit to identify waste. And there's two clear processes or two clear directions I'd like to go down with that route, and that is how much net zero and a climate emergency is costing us within Shropshire, and how much equality and diversity across all divisions of different departments is costing us in Shropshire, because I think there's considerable money to be saved. I'm not going to mention any particular council, but already from cancelling the climate emergency, we're seeing savings of around 32 million over a 4-year period. And we need to get to the bottom of these. I think we're ignoring them. So it's something I think needs to be closely looked at.
But a comment on that, I think that there rightfully matters for council, and it's council to decide what to invest in, whether it invests in quality, diversity, or net zero. That's not really a matter for the audit committee. We're about process. So if the council does choose to invest in those, we need to look at whether it's doing that properly and at what resources it's using, and whether there's right controls and checks. So I think when this comes to council, you're happy to make that point, but I think it's a point for council rather than a point for the audit committee. We do look at value for money. The internal audit section looks at value for money, which is waste in essential. Is this section delivering value for money when it goes into services? And you can see the outcome from that in the internal reports reported to you, and indeed in the external audit report as well. So with that, I'll move to Kate.
Yeah, thanks. And I might be able to, I can completely agree. We're not a political committee, and it's very much about how we do things, but I might be able to address some of the points you made in this. So I'm going to suggest that we as a committee have it's a motion, I guess, which is because we need to decide how we try and keep on top of this very worrying problem. We've got a statutory recommendation. Our role is to try and monitor the control environment and what is happening with our finances and governance. So I've made I've pulled together something that can be added to if people want to, which I hope the committee will agree with, which is so as well as bringing the relevant reports to the audit committee, and we have regular reports that come through like finance, etc. And I have this written down if people want it after the event. The audit committee asks following the statutory recommendation. The first one is around the role of internal audit. I believe we have a really good internal audit department in this council that we could use. And I'm going to suggest that we ask internal audit to closely consider the following. Now, I'm aware that you may already be doing some of this, so the word is consider. So I'd like to understand the new budgeting process that is referred to in the management response, which is for 26-27. There's reference to a new budgeting process, but we don't know what that is. So I think internal audit, as well as possibly the audit committee, should have a role in that. I think we need to understand maybe not the entire improvement board's action plan, although perhaps there are elements we need to look at, but certainly the action plan in relation to the elements that deal with our limited assurance. I think that we should have that for each meeting. Actually, we need to look at what the action plan is for that. I think that we should ask internal audit, if you haven't already done so, to be looking at the effectiveness of the spending boards. So this was the reassurance we got that, things with the setting up of the spending boards, things should improve, but we haven't got any reassurance on that. I think we need to review the process for calculating exceptional financial support. This is a worry. It keeps kind of rising, and how are we making these assessments? And to ensure that this isn't a long-term part of the ongoing financial strategy for the council. We can't just rely on asking each year for additional money. I think certainly internal audit needs to be involved in the pre-budget report, and I've added during this meeting to my list following Councillor Rowley and Councillor Husman's suggestions, the process for the reporting of potential savings, because that does seem to have gotten us into trouble. And then the final point that internal audit may be able to help us with is the potential value for money areas of saving, which is again your point. Are there areas that we are not looking at currently? If you go to team managers to ask them what to do, there may be blind spots in what they want to suggest. So are there areas that we could be looking at, which relates to your point on waste? So those are for internal audit. That's a lot. You would have to give up everything you're doing. So I think it's something that we need to consider, and possibly myself and Duncan to meet with you after the event and go through. But that's what I'm going to suggest. And then the second part of this motion as well is I think the council needs, if it's not doing already, to conduct a review of the cost of minimum viable service provision. And I don't know whether that's part of the plans of the board already, but I think that's something that we should be asking for.
Thank you, Chair. This is called a motion, but unfortunately we've had no pre-sight of it, and then there was 7 or 8 different things within there, which I think is unfair for them to expect this committee to approve, some of which were scrutiny and not audit, but I'd not be able to say which one was which because I have authority in front of me to be able to pick it out without going through them all again. And I am concerned of the extra responsibility put on audit, who do some of this work anyway as a matter of course. Maybe that's just about better reporting back to us. But I am concerned that this has been brought to us and blindsided us really as to what we do as a committee.
I can make a suggestion or amendment. I think, first of all, we need to actually deal with the report. So first thing I think is that this committee refers the external auditor's report to council, so that council can discharge the obligations on the authority under Schedule 7. And probably recommends that to council that the report is accepted and a detailed action plan is prepared as specified. I don't think that's controversial to anyone. Then I think we're actually asking for internal audit to review their work programme, it seems to me, and to accommodate consideration of the 26-27 budget process, the action plan on limited assurance, the effectiveness of the spending boards, the preparation of urgency financial support, savings and the business cases that are the process we have used to identify whether savings are robust and whether there should be a wider value for money work across the council, because it could be areas of the council that have not been considered by internal audit have opportunities for value for money savings. And I think that's not an unreasonable request to say, I mean, looking at internal audit to say whether they think that's unreasonable, but I think it's asking them to consider that as part of their plan. It's not dictating them to them that must be their plan, because that's not our role, but it's asking them to consider that. So perhaps I'm being me and then you bring you back, Nigel, that's okay.
Chair, the first part of what you said was very laudable and I would agree with. Then you bolted on all the rest of the stuff, and so leaving us with only one option, that we'd have to agree with all of it. And I think that's a little unfair, is that you ought to split the two, the recommendations, and we agree with that, to give me the opportunity then to say no to the other. Thank you.
Agree, Nigel. We can split the two into 2 recommendations and people can vote accordingly. That's fine. Sorry, I can't be an internal audit to comment on the post.
Yeah, just in terms of the 2025-26 internal audit plan, obviously we can review what is currently within that plan and where the Audit and Governance Committee is receiving those assurances, and we can compare that to and make any adjustments. The other thing that I would say is we're about to commence the planning process for 2026-27, so i.e. the plan that will commence from the 1st of April 2026, and there's a consultation process as part of that now. It is really important in that process that we're considering the improvement plan works and the deliverables that we've talked about today, including the recommendations of the external auditor, so we can certainly take that away and consider it.
Quite a few people want to speak to me now. Who was first? Can't remember. Carl. We've got Carl, Malcolm, and then Kate.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Nigel a little bit. So I get the first bit, and so maybe as a second piece, I don't want to delay things. Is it possible we could an amendment maybe to defer those recommendations to the next committee?
Take it in two bites. So if we deal with the first and it's out of the way, then we can deal with the more contentious bit about the second part.
Yeah, just an observation. Obviously, the importance of the financial emergency, etc. The volume of work that's coming to this committee. You know, the current for today, we've got over 500 pages. The amount of stuff. I think we need to be absolutely ruthless for this committee and pare it down to the bare minimum, which is the financial emergency. It is an emergency, and we should focus on that. And without wishing to name anything else on the agenda, some of them are lower priority, and I think we have to look to maybe not cover those in the committee.
Okay.
I suppose, I appreciate this is very short notice, but I guess last Thursday we discovered this statutory recommendation. So we haven't had much time, and believe me, myself and Duncan have had a series of meetings over the last week. So we've been working very short notice on that. So I do appreciate that. I'm not sure that there's anything in here that is that controversial. I want the audit committee to be seen as responding to this statement, and while we're passing it on to council, I think it would be a good idea to give some sort of level of leadership in terms of the actual internal audit finances. So, I mean, we can look to a later meeting to do this, but we have, you know, we're being told that we're at risk of going into, potentially a 114. So I guess, I'm happy to kind of read out or to pare down, but I would suggest that given that all we're asking is a consideration of looking at value for money at some of the action plans, I don't feel it's too controversial. Perhaps it is.
Good. Sorry, Katie.
Just to provide some reassurance, there's nothing in there that Kate mentioned in her motion that isn't already part of our thought process, just to provide the committee with reassurance about how we go about planning our internal audit work. Every committee you get a revised internal audit plan. We're constantly reviewing the audit plan, whether we're doing the right audits at the right time. We're starting the process for planning for next year's audit. So you've got, I think it's item 7 on the report, you've got what's left in the plan that we've got in this year to do. We'll revise that again in February, and part of that would be those considerations anyway. I'd be looking, as part of my planning process, going through the external auditor's report to see are there any areas we need to provide assurance on in the interim, that we're not waiting for them to come back next year. We're meeting with all the senior leadership team, invited Duncan and Kate to have input into that plan as well. So there's nothing in there that I wouldn't already be thinking of when I'm putting the plan together. We'd be looking at the strategic risks and the priorities of the organisation, and part of that is everything that's in that improvement plan anyway.
Nigel, then I must move to the vote. We must get on with things.
I'm particularly reassured by that, but what I will say then is, why is this committee suggesting to Audit that they do what they do as their day job? This is now sucking an egg, I think.
Maybe we don't need to do that. Can I just try and get the first part on the way, which seemed to be non-contentious? I'll just go through the wording again, that we refer the external auditor's report to council so that the council can discharge the obligations on the authority under Schedule 7. We recommend that the report is accepted and that a detailed action plan is prepared covering every recommendation, and that action plan will be monitored by the audit committee and reported to every meeting of the audit committee, because it is the most important thing we're faced with at the moment. So I'll move that from the chair, if that's all right. We'll have a seconder from somebody, okay, and have a show of hands in favour of that. Is that unanimous? Looks, is anybody opposed or abstaining? No, okay, that's unanimous. Okay, I think probably then, I mean, it seems to be internal audit have heard the issues raised. I'm not sure we need to go beyond that. What do you think, Kate? I wonder if you want to withdraw and just leave it to them to produce it. We'll have it back to us as an amended plan, and if we think it's deficient by not having certain items on it that we ought to be, we can raise it at that time.
I think as long as this discussion is minuted, and these suggestions have been made, and then maybe I think we could meet at another time and take a look at. That's fine with me.
Okay then, so with that we'll move on to item 7, which is the Internal Audit Performance Report and Revised Annual Action Plan.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides members with an update on the work undertaken by Internal Audit in the 2.5 months since their September committee meeting. In total, 7 final reports have been issued in the period from the 18th of August to the 2nd of November. All of those are listed with their assurance rating and broken down by service area at paragraph 8.4. 4 draft reports are awaiting management responses, so they'll be included within the next performance report to the February Audit Committee. Work has also commenced for external clients in addition to drafting and auditing of financial statements for the external clients and certification of grant claims for Shropshire Council. In the period up to the 2nd of November, 5 reports have been issued of good and reasonable assurance, which accounts for 71% of the opinions delivered. This represents a significant increase in the higher levels of assurance for this period compared to 33% in the same reporting period for 2024-25 and the previous year outturn of 58%. This is offset by a corresponding decrease in limited and unsatisfactory assurances, currently 29% for the period compared to 67% in the same period for 24-25. However, in paragraph 8.14, the report considers the year-to-date trend in assurance opinions, and the number of lower assurances to date is 58%, which is higher than the outturn for 2024-25 of 42%. And as reported in September, the higher proportion of lower assurance levels continues to be a concern. A total of 54 recommendations have been made across those 7 final audit reports. The breakdown of these by audit and recommendation rating are shown at paragraph 8.4. There are 2 fundamental recommendations which have been made in the period, which are detailed in paragraph 8.11. The fundamental recommendations relate to work completed on key supply contracts and the ASC outturn position report that has been alluded to in earlier reports. Unplanned projects and advisory work not included within the original audit plan is detailed in paragraph 8.13. This includes internal audit work requested by the former Chief Executive in relation to the 2024-25 adult social care outturn position. A further management update is to be presented to the committee today in response to that internal audit report. As part of the wider improvement plan works, in October 2025, the internal audit manager has issued lists of recommendations to all service directors requesting updated management responses and revised implementation dates, the results from which are being reported to the interim chief executive and the wider statutory officers group, and I can report positive progress in this respect, as Tanya referred to earlier on. I can provide you with assurance that I am involved in the statutory officers group meetings, and through this and the senior leadership forum, I have input into the improvement plan and had sight on the contents of it. The details of limited assurance level audit areas are detailed in Appendix A, and I would question as to whether members
You weren't till
seek...
10, were you?
No, but by the time I got in, parked up.
Sorry. Details of the limited assurance level opinions are detailed in Appendix A, and I would ask whether members would like to seek any further assurances in relation to those areas. And finally, as I reported in September, the internal audit recruitment campaign was completed successfully. We have appointed 3 qualified and experienced senior auditors, 2 of which commenced work with us on the 17th of November and the other starting on the 2nd of December. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Excellent news about the staffing. Good to hear you're nearly up to full staff, just one short at the moment. That's brilliant. I think that hasn't been a situation for many years, so that's good. Yeah, well, we're obviously going to accept the report. Any questions on it? I think the one that would normally, sorry, Malcolm, you go for it.
Sorry, thank you. Just a couple of questions. The adult social care outturn says implementation date end of September. Was that achieved? Is question one. And question two on the direction of travel chart on 814, which I think is a great graph. I love graphs like this. It all seems, the last 6 years, all seems very stable. You know, good and reasonable around about the 60% mark. And then as you commented, this year to date, that's dropped around 40%. Any observations as to why that might be for this financial year?
I think, you know, in general terms, the internal audit work that's undertaken across the financial year obviously covers all areas of the council. So I can't at this stage be pinpointing specific elements of that. We should be in a position as we're moving into the February audit committee and then towards the back end of the financial year and the work that we do in Q4 to have a better idea in terms of where that lies. But obviously, as we move through the financial year, we see the numbers of significant recommendations and possibly fundamental recommendations increase, and we're obviously reporting on where they sit within the organisation and the actions that are required to mitigate the risks that have been identified. And we are satisfied that we're receiving the management responses to the findings within internal audit work, and the appropriate measures being put in place. So to answer your question, we'll be in a better position towards the back end of the financial year to pinpoint that trend. But obviously, as I've said in my report, it is a concern that we're seeing a higher proportion of limited and unsatisfactory assurance levels.
It may be coincidental, but of course we had a significant downsizing with a new target operating model at that time, and that I have no idea, I've got no evidence of this, but that could have affected compliance at that time. Maybe it's now coming back as new people learning their new roles and bedding in their new practices. Maybe, but you know, I can't say that's the reason, but it could be an explanation. Okay, the one that was sitting out to me, sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, from the question asked was, would the committee like any called in so that we have an update of key supply contracts? But I think we ought to have that one as one, because that's a biggie and goes into where a lot of money is. Thank you.
Yeah, we can call that one in. And the one that noted to me was the shareholder disposal, which is a significant amount of potential asset, whatever's happening to it in terms of the process. So maybe that's something we ought to have back here just to understand what the issues are and what's been done with them, where the action plan is being implemented, so we can have confidence that's being managed appropriately. So with that, are we happy with those two elements to have further work on, and thank the internal audit team for their work? Show of hands for that. Thank you very much. It is the adult social care outturn update, and it's Tanya back again. You're still with us, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So as we previously heard in the previous item, this is the adult social care outturn update. So following the 24-25 financial outturn position and the significant deterioration compared to the previous report period of 11, the former Chief Executive requested our internal audit team to undertake a review. The purpose of this review was to determine how the adult social care outturn position was not adequately captured in the previous monitoring report projections, and whether the proposals being put in place to mitigate the risk of this happening again are sufficient and robust. So just further context, and we have previously discussed this in brief today. As at period 11, the People's Directorate, which was Adults and Children's Social Care, was forecasting an overspend at outturn of 16.1 million. However, at period 12, following year-end reconciliation of expenditure, income and savings, this variance increased to a total of 31.2 million, of which 15 million of this movement was within adult social care budgets. Key findings from the audit review determined there was a misalignment of savings delivery monitoring and reporting between the monthly monitoring data reviewed by budget holders and the finance team, and the reflection and updating of this information within the issues were not spotted until a reconciliation of actual expenditure and income was undertaken at the end of the year, and 11.7 million of projected savings was at that point identified as not being cashable. Overall, the internal audit review resulted in 6 recommendations which have been accepted by all officers, and implementations of these are underway. Included within the 6 recommendations was one fundamental recommendation relating to the reporting of actual expenditure and income in addition to the forecast expenditure and income. This recommendation was implemented in period 6 and reflected in the Q2 finance monitoring report that went to our cabinet on the 19th of November. A further 4 recommendations are rated significant and 1 requires attention. Work is underway to implement each of these, the majority of which are expected to be fully implemented by Q3. Other key changes to note: a review and rationalisation of the volume of cost centres utilised within our system for adult social care budgets, and a simplification of these will mitigate against the risk of areas being overlooked in the future. As we have just discussed earlier, a review of all saving targets and how they're reflected within budgets. Robust savings delivery plans detailing how savings are proposed to be achieved. And a council-wide audit of budget monitoring, which is nearing finalisation. The wider budget monitoring audit is currently underway, and the audit forms part of the approval of 25-26 internal audit plan, which will come to this committee in February 26. I propose that a further update on the progress made from this audit of the adult social care outturn position comes to this committee in June 2026. I refer committee now to the 6 recommendations within the plan in terms of the position as at the 13th of November. And if I just step through these, Chair. So recommendation 1.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't seem to have that appendix in my list of papers that were sent out. Apologies for interrupting.
It's in the pack. I don't know why you wouldn't have it. I've got it.
Okay, I've
I think
taken
it was attached as a separate item on the
Right,
agenda page.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
On Tanya, I'll email it to you.
No problem. So the 6 recommendations. The first one was fundamental. I can confirm that reporting commenced from period 6 as planned. This recommendation has been implemented and is reflected in our Q2 financial position. Recommendation 2, which was a significant, the update position, high risk areas within the budget and key assumptions that have been taken within finance to inform the high risk projections within the monitoring position will be summarised and documented in the monthly finance update to Leadership Board. This will also be included for the first time in the period 7 finance update. Recommendation 3, this work is ongoing with finance to verify savings that are being detailed in the service savings trackers for 25-26. Recommendation 4 was also significant, the update position. Work has not yet commenced on this. but it's planned that this subject will be discussed and taken forward at the Finance Business Partner Collaboration Day in December. Recommendation 5, significant. Monitoring has been developed to track the last date that the budget monitoring has taken place each month by the budget holder's deadline. This highlights any areas where budgets are not being reviewed. This will be included in the monthly finance update for Leadership Board and will also be included for the first time in our Period 7 finance update. And then recommendation 6, which requires attention. Discussions will be taking place in November to understand short-term improvement opportunities with the aim of implemented interim arrangements at the end of quarter 3. Chair.
Very much. It sounds like by the next meeting in February, vast majority of the action should have been completed. I think there might be one on item 6, which is April 2026, but with that we should look. Any questions on this, or do we wish to approve the recommendations, which are to thank the officers for their work on this, note the progress and look forward to the next report in February? I'll move that from the chair then. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Kate. Well, those in favour? Thank you very much. Completed, I think that means.
It just happened completed.
That means completed, it normally does.
Recommendation 5, which is probably the most biggest one with significant monitoring, has been developed to, this will be included for the first time in P7 finance update, or we haven't had the P7 finance update, so that isn't completed. I would have thought that's a red issue rather than a green issue, but
I've been James in who explained the colour coding, because obviously I haven't got lost here.
So all we did was we identified the green where they could be implemented straight away, that there was no kind of follow-up in relation to that. It was fairly self-evident in terms of what that would be. So we flagged those as green, so that they will be in they were in the quarter 2, they're in the period 7, it's those sorts of things where it's longer and we're going to need, in reality, internal audit to come back and review it before we can give assurance those things happening, because they're not self-evidential by actually seeing the report and seeing them in there. Those were flagged as amber. There's nothing flagged as red, simply because we were on the track, in the process of delivering them all.
can we have a key that tells us that then, rather than just random colours?
Okay. Right, we'll move on to item 9, the lantern management update. And is Matt Jordan with us? Yes, sorry, I couldn't see you over there. I'll have to put my glasses on and off. So, oh, it's Steve here. Sorry, Steve. Happy to say a few words to us, Stephen? Yeah, well.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I'm here representing Matt Jordan, who's unfortunately not able to attend, but produced a report for the committee, which was originally supposed to go to September, but was deferred to this session. Matt Jordan is the Facilities and Maintenance Manager. He has responsibility for the management of the lantern, which is the subject of this first line assurance report. It's one of our PFI assets in Shrewsbury, and has a number of booking spaces available for both staff and the public to use in the community. This item relates to an audit which originally took place in 21-22, and then a further follow-up audit which took place in 24-25. The initial audit set out a number of recommendations around weaknesses in control procedures, systems and financial management in relation to the booking systems in place for the lantern. The follow-up audit in 24-25 reported limited progress in addressing the recommendations, so hence why this is back on the agenda here. So I'm now pleased to update that all recommendations have now been addressed, with the earlier delays related to the implementation and launch of a new booking system, which has been put in place several months ago. So recommendations have been addressed as most of the systems and integration of the processes are now in line with the new system, which has enabled the improvements to have taken place alongside some procedural updates and changes. So out of the 13 significant recommendations and the 8 which required attention, they have now been addressed and were reported as such in August 2025. There is one recommendation which has been addressed as far as practical, and this will be reviewed in the follow-up audit, which is due to take place, and that is just around the backup procedure should we experience a whole-scale loss in ICT failure, so if systems are all down. So in summary, all recommendations have now been addressed.
Sounds good to me. In terms of the recommendations on the report, it's suggesting that we note the corrective action undertaken and then the responsible lot of reports back progress in 6 months. I'm conscious of a very long agenda on this. I'm going to suggest that you report back to me your progress and that we only bring it back to the committee if there's problems, frankly, because we're just trying to reduce the number of items on this report. But Kate.
Yeah, just to support that, because I think in the I think it was January meeting, all the recommendations were reported to have been completed, or nearly all of them. And I believe, and Nigel might be able to tell better, I think this has been a rolling issue with this particular report. So it would be good to have a further progress report on this, just to make sure what's being done is being done.
So you're happy with the reports back to me and only bring it back to committee if there's a problem, rather than putting it on the agenda of the committee?
I think so, although yeah.
Just to confirm, we have got the follow-up audit booked in for the new year, so we will be doing the internal audit again. We'd anticipate that with the next report into the audit committee would be the June-July one, so you'll get an update from us, and at that point, if there's got management assurance is implemented, you'll then get audit assurance, and if it hasn't, at that point you could decide whether you.
Nigel?
Yeah, Kate's quite right. We've been going on for this year after year, and it is actually amazing that all of a sudden all of the recommendations have been done, and I think you'll find that's as a direct result of the new regime and wanting to achieve. And the CEO mentioned that there were 135 recommendations outstanding, and now there's only 36 or whatever. And this is, I think, is a direct result, and it's great. Thank you.
Appreciate those comments. I'm sure the staff do. Okay, well, with that, we'll move those recommendations then. That we note the improvements you've made, that the internal audit will review, and that will be included in the summary report to us. So there's no need to have a specific report. We will pick it up on that summary report. Is that okay? Do we have a second vote on that? Are you in agreement with that? Okay, thank you very much. Shall we move on to deferred payments management update? Just for everybody's benefit, I'm going to try and finish at 12:30. So if we get towards 12:30 and haven't finished, we may be deferring some items to the next meeting, but that's my intention. Thank you for joining us. Welcome along. So yes, talk to us about the deferred payment scheme.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to the chair and the committee for inviting us to present on the audit progress today. So I'm Deb Webster. I'm service manager for commissioning and governance within the commissioning service area.
I'm Kim Russon. I'm the team leader for the financial assessment team.
So this report is setting out the actions taken to address the areas for improvement within the deferred payment process, looking at addressing the issues raised around the control environment and the oversight of the financial assessment team. So just for context, the financial assessment team is part of the business support services within adult social care, and that team's responsible for evaluating individuals' financial circumstances, determining funding options for support services. So one of their areas of work involves managing the deferred payments process, which allows eligible individuals to delay payment for certain services, such as residential care, until a later date. So that process helps alleviate that immediate financial pressure whilst maintaining access to services. So the audit findings on the control environment were that in 24-25 there were 19 recommendations. 9 of those were significant and 10 were required attention. The key concerns really were around income management, timely invoicing, interest calculation, documentation processes. They were around policy and processes, some gaps in legal matters, and some system controls and needing to update systems and accrued interest calculations. The assurance level was unsatisfactory. So in summary, the progress on the recommendations is that all the recommendations are now either complete or in advanced progress. They've got ongoing monitoring and a programme of continuous improvement. 95% of the recommendations have been completed since the audit, and the remaining 5% were actually done whilst the audit was taking place. So there were a number of financial risks identified around financial controls and governance and systems, as I've mentioned, and that there was an opportunity there that addressing those risks would improve the financial controls and strengthen our governance. The audit found specific areas around interest charges not being applied to post-Care Act deferred payments, some delays in debt recovery, and a fragmented process across multiple IT systems. And the opportunity there was that addressing them would lead to both financial and reputational improvement. So just as a quick overview of those actions and mitigations, I won't go through them all in detail given your vast agenda today, but the financial controls, we have implemented robust controls. There are regular audits and there's prompt recovery of deferred payments. We have strengthened our frameworks for governance and standardised the policy approval. The policy will be coming to Cabinet in February now for sign-off, an enhanced documentation system. We've got streamlined systems, integrated data platforms and improved management reporting. And in the appendix, there's a specific action against all of those. So just in conclusion then, that structured action plan is in place. Very happy to report back to Audit Committee within 6 months or at whatever interval is felt to be appropriate. The audit did reveal significant risks, but a substantial process has been in place to address those. We've got a continued focus on robust controls and governance. There is also, in addition, a working group which is going to continue to look at other improvements which can continue to be made for service delivery for deferred payments.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for your considered and detailed response and for the information you've given us. Best. So any questions from the committee? Yeah, come on, Jim.
Just curious as to the scale of the deferred payments. What is the total value that's currently on deferral?
I don't actually have that information with me today, but I can get it back to you.
Yeah,
ballpark? No,
clearly something that's obviously got problems highlighted by the audit. Is it £1,000 or is it a lot of money? I think it's a relevant figure for the.
Yeah, it's hundreds of thousands of pounds that's deferred at present.
Thank you.
But I suppose the question is whether we need to have them back in 6 months or whether we're satisfied with what we've heard. Is there another internal audit? Sorry, Nigel.
So yeah, we're planning to go back in and do another internal audit. So based on their target implementation dates, they've actually implemented things a little sooner. So we were planning to go back in Q2 26-27, which will give that policy a time to have gone through Cabinet. And Deb's got other audits going on in her area at the moment, so it wouldn't be the best timing to go back in straight away.
Yeah, we'll wait to receive that outcome from that back to the committee to decide we need anything further. That's probably be enough for us. It seems that you've addressed all the issues. That's what it's all about, improving. And it sounds as though the service has improved.
To be honest, it's been a positive process and it's given us that opportunity for improvement, so it's welcome.
Very good to hear. Sorry, I mean, it's quite good to have that feedback because that's really, it's here to add value, not to negate things. Sorry, did somebody else want to speak? Was that Nigel? No, Nigel doesn't want to speak. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, we move on to item 11, which is Treasury Strategy Mid-Year Review Change.
I'll just give a very quick introduction here, Chair. So this is the mid-year review of the Treasury strategy for the current year. So this comes to Audit Committee along with the strategy. Quarterly reports go through to Cabinet, which demonstrate the performance. This is just around the providing assurance around the strategy that's in place and the adoption of that. There are significant amounts of information included within the report, set out in the appendices, which set out where investments are, how we apply against our potential limits, all of which we are falling within. We have a potential borrowing schedule, which is quite a small and confusing document, which I can take people through outside of the meeting if necessary. And then we just have an update from our Treasury advisors. All of the work that we've done is within this year is within that Treasury strategy and the limits that are set within that, and all with the advice of our Treasury advisors. So I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
I'm always to agree with this. So are there any questions on the strategy? James is expecting some very difficult and challenging questions. They'll be disappointing. Okay, can we move to set the strategy then? Somebody move that? Okay, you've been busy this morning, and we have a show of hands to approve the strategy. Thank you very much. The number, but I haven't got the item. Yeah, self-assessment. So, yes, that down to you as well. Or
Again, I can quickly introduce this. This is the self-assessment that's been undertaken. Of the audit committee. It follows best practice and it demonstrates the training schedules that have been put in place, and there'll be further training for audit committee members going forward. So there is a set of best practice assessment questions which are set out in Appendix A. The majority of those, we believe the answer is yes, but in some cases there is a partial compliance with those. Appendix B then sets out where that partial compliance is and sets out the proposed action in relation to that. And Appendix D covers the evidence that backs that up. In between that, Appendix C then is the self-assessment in terms of the basic skills and knowledge baseline for the committee themselves. So 7 responses that came back have been analysed within that. You can see we've colour-coded it without a key. Fortunately, I apologise. But basically, the red is where there is a level of lack of confidence, let's just say, where the majority is within that middle area of comfortable. Then we've shown that as well, it's supposed to be amber, but it's more of a beige sort of colour. And then where the majority of members of the audit committee are confident, then we've shown those as green. So clearly, I think the areas that are red are the areas for the highest priority to be considered and picked up. But happy to take any questions or for the committee to debate that as necessary.
And my thanks to the people who organised the training session we had at Lantern. I think we've got another session coming up in January or February, can't remember which, January possibly, and that may be an opportunity to look at some of these areas where we need further assistance and training. Any comments, or are we happy to approve that self-assessment and strategy? Mover to approve them? Is Mark going to be busy and move something? I can see, Mark, it's the exercise for this morning. Okay, and we have a show of hands and agree that. Thank you very much. Item 13 then, I think, is the counter forward annual review.
Thank you, Chair. This is the counter fraud, bribery and anti-corruption strategy report. So I'll just give a very quick overview. The counter fraud, bribery and anti-corruption strategy has been reviewed. This is a document that is reviewed by the Audit and Governance Committee on an annual basis. We complete that review. It continues to underpin the Council's commitment to prevent all forms of fraud, bribery or corruption, whether it be attempted on or from within the Council, thus demonstrating the continuing important role the strategy plays in the corporate governance and internal control framework wider across the Council. So the report provides an update on the action plan to ensure continuous improvement in the fight against fraud, bribery and corruption, and provides an update to members in the response to national and local issues. The strategy is located on the council's website alongside the speaking up about wrongdoing policies for both staff and the public, and the anti-money laundering procedure and guidance. A review of these has identified minor changes which have been reflected in the strategy and supporting policies, procedures and guidance. And paragraph 8.12 of the report shows the Audit Committee approved an action plan to ensure that the council continues to protect its assets from and to further improve its resilience to fraud and corruption. The points within the table have been and continue to be delivered. Section 8 of the report provides members with some 2025 updates on the national picture, including references to some key supporting guidance and documentation. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Duncan. Harry Hancock Davis for Battlefield. I think reading the strategy and, from 2023, 2024 and 2025, we do seem to be moving in the right direction. I understand as well the minimal changes which have been made are partially due to digitalisation. I think we're moving in that right direction. I still make the point, and I thank the chairman of the council for bringing the motion forward, which is the next item. I still make the point that without any operational resource, we can't actually apply this framework appropriately. I'd also like to ask, in terms of the NFI, so last year we had £5,200 in savings, which related to, as it states here, to deceased pensioners and taxi drivers. There doesn't seem to be any savings last year and this year with regards to council tax single person discounts, which I find a little bit strange. So I'd like some figures on that as well, because my understanding is that the Revenues and Benefits Department, as their resource has been diminished during the last administration, and the fact that when these matches come back, they are not mandatory. It is mandatory to upload the data, but the coalition government didn't actually mandate the data to be actioned when the matches are returned. I'd also like clarification as to whether the Revs and Bens team still outsource these to a third party, such as the system provider, which is NEC. So I'd like to see that as well. But I do think that we are moving in the right direction with this, but we can discuss further on item 14. Thank you, Chair.
And Sally, can you answer any of those questions?
So we can't answer them directly. I can take them away. I'd have to ask the Revenues and Benefits Manager about what their approach is. Could be a number of things. It could be they've reviewed some of the matches and haven't had a chance to update each individual one. I can get the information off him and come back to you, or circulate it via the chair, whichever the committee would prefer.
I think you can go back to Harry. That would be appreciated, and either you or Sharon, as a substantive member, can bring it forward at the next meeting. So. Okay, with that, are we happy to approve the strategy? Show of hands for that. I move that from the chair. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to move the fraud investigation 14 to the end in the hope that we can deal with 15, 17 and 18 quite quickly, and then have the rest of the time to consider item 14. So if we can move to item 15, which is a final approval statement of accounts, and bring James in.
Yes, Chair, and could I ask that we also pick up item 17 at the same time, and then if I just give a brief introduction, hand over to Avtar, and then we can take those two items together. So item 15, sorry, back page. There we go. Right. Item 15, which is the final approval of the Statement of Accounts 24-25. So the Statement of Accounts was produced and circulated to Audit Committee as a draft and considered. The audit was then undertaken by Grant Thornton. Work has been done to continue in relation to the finalisation of those accounts. Within the report at item 15, there is a table 1, which is the amendments to the Statement of Accounts. You can see there that there is basically a small number of amendments that fall in different parts of the accounts relating to peppercorn rents and donated assets for leases. There were a few other impacts that were shown within other notes of the accounts. So all in all, very little in terms of amendments to the accounts themselves. The audit is predominantly completed now, but I'll hand over to Avatar to kind of just talk through the findings of the report, and then happy to circle back and pick up any issues, questions that people have.
Thank you, James. Avatar.
Thank you, Chair. So I won't go through the report in too much detail, just hope it being read, but just to give an overview, we've substantially completed the audit now. There is a few queries outstanding, but none of those should lead to any sort of material errors or material adjustments required to the financial statements. We identified one unadjusted misstatement, which is at 2.2 million, and this was in respect to a valuation where incorrect data had been used. So when we came to audit it, we spotted that incorrect data had been used, and were able to work out what the difference in the valuation would have been. But given this is below materiality levels of 14.7 million, we're happy and comfortable with the council not adjusting the accounts for this item. It's normal practice, and it's also included as an item in our letter of representation to say this is unadjusted. But we wouldn't expect the council to be adjusting for everything which is immaterial. In terms of the key steps now, in terms of signing off the audit opinion, are just completing, making sure the final areas of audits are complete where we've got some queries. The main thing now for me would be we're trying to receive a final capitalisation directive letter from the MHCLG, which basically confirms the values in the accounts. And once we receive that, the audit will be substantially complete, and then we are looking to sign off the audit opinion sometime in December. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Avatar. It's reassuring that whatever other problems we have, it doesn't seem that the statement of accounts is one of them. So, and that's, it's not typical for all councils. So some councils have some serious issues in completing their statement of accounts. So it's not to be underestimated that this little part of the council is progressing well, and I credit to all those involved. Any questions for either Avatar or James on this? Yes, Jim.
Just an observation around the amount of money that's owed to the council. It rose by £30 million in the year, and from a governance and oversight point of view, I wonder who's responsible and accountable for collecting that money and ensuring.
A good question.
This, my chair, this is one of the areas that we are looking to address in terms of debt owed to the council. The impact on the kind of the revenue account is minimal because it sits on the balance sheet, but in terms of the cash flow position and the treasury strategy that we've talked about, and the fact that we're now into a position whereby we are and we will be using exceptional financial support, actually our cash position becomes more important. So I think there'll be a greater focus on that to try and reduce the level of debt outstanding, and to also try and ensure that the payments are focused in a way that improves our cash flow position. So it is it's listed within the improvement plan which Cabinet will be considering on Wednesday.
Just another comment. I think the on £30 million, if you're borrowing at 4%, that's 1.2 million of cost, which does go to the revenue account.
Thanks. That's exactly the point. If we improve our cash flow position, part of this is about notification of that as well. This is a year-end position, so some of those situations could literally be resolved the next day, kind of thing. But the underlying point is absolutely correct. We need to be bringing more in, and so there are actions around following that.
Great.
Thanks. Just a quick question on that. Can you give us just a rough idea of who owes us the money? Where's that debt building up?
Well, there's Mrs. Jones. Sorry, I'm being facetious. There's I think I can get you an analysis of those. Just to be aware, this I mentioned it forms part of the Treasury strategy. Our working capital, which is the debtors creditors balance, is considered regularly by our treasurers, our treasury advisors, because it helps us then to identify where are areas that we can adjust those levers. So I can get you a breakdown of where those key areas of debt are sat in our sundry debtors. Just to be clear, that's completely separate to the debt that we hold in relation to council tax, which is again another issue, but that's been discussed previously.
Yes, sorry, Ben.
Just wanted to add quickly that there is a specific piece of internal audit work on debt recovery being undertaken at the moment. So the final report will be included within the internal audit performance report when that's completed. So you'll see the results of that work as well.
Okay, well, the recommendation is that we approve the statement of account, so I can sign them apparently. So that's in 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. Can I have a mover for that? Okay. Oh, well, Duncan's going to move that one by way of change. And we have a show of hands for that, please. Thank you very much. We move to item 18 then, which is the repo report from Barry. Oh, sorry, from Katie, my apologies. I've not got the report in front of me.
Thank you, Chair. This is one that's usually taken on the exempt agenda, but as there's no completed fraud investigations, it's not exempt. In terms of updates, it's very brief. There are no completed investigations. We've got 7 still ongoing that will be reported to future committees. And at Section 8, it gives an update on the RIPA activity. So consideration is still being given to the approach for RIPA within the organisation following the restructure.
Are any questions for Katie on that, or we just note that? So move to note. I move to note. Just note that. And then we can return to item, was it 15, which is the referral from council on options for fraud investigation and work. So I'll hand back over to James. 14, yes, I have. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. Item 14 is a review of the options in relation to fraud investigation. The various options that have been considered are set out in paragraph 2.2, which includes having a dedicated team, sharing a team across a region, contracting out to an external provider, providing some sort of a hybrid between each of those, embedding this within the internal audit team. And then there's just the minimum in terms of those collaborative national schemes whereby information is fed in and comes back on a national basis. So what the report tries to do is set out the key issues. I think the regulations are set out in the risk assessment that follow this. Within the background, the motion as set out in full is shown within paragraph 7.2. The current arrangements are identified in the following section, which is basically to say that the majority of this work is done within the internal audit team using the national recognised data as necessary. The appendix, it's probably best to work to the appendix. Appendix A shows the different delivery models that have been set out as discussed in those options, and against each of these a set of considerations in terms of what the advantages and disadvantages of these different types of approach are. They're not exhaustive, but they just try and give a feel for the main areas for consideration. I think the key issue with a lot of these is about the difference between identifying fraud and then trying to recover it, and the approach to try and prevent fraud from happening in the first place. If we can prevent fraud, and we've got strong controls around that, then there is less of a requirement, or less of a value added, let's say, for then going and investigating fraud afterwards. If we have weak internal controls that are not followed appropriately, then there's the potential for further fraud to be undertaken, and then at that point, there was a question then about recovery of that fraudulent costs, which would then help subsidise the cost of the officers undertaking that. I think it's fair to say that often in relation to fraud, it's difficult to kind of quantify the level of fraud that has been diverted or avoided through the controls that are in place. And in a sense is at limited cost, and where there are teams that are undertaking fraud investigation and trying to recover that cost, there is then part of that recovery of the costs of fraud are partly again about the level that then would be avoided. So had this continued on for another 2 years, then it would have cost this, but actually the level of recovery might be minimal based on what's been identified at that point. So the recommendation is basically asking to consider those options that are there, and if the audit committee feels that the current arrangements which are in place, which is the embedded internal audit approach, if they feel that that is insufficient or wish to make a change, then to recommend that to the council's cabinet, whereby they could then consider an approach in terms of the overall policy arrangements. From that, then we would look at the structure in relation to that.
Thank you, James. Any questions, comments, proposals? Yeah, Nigel.
Just as an opener, and I will come back, regarding a dedicated team, two staff members, how much would that cost a year? Approximately.
So as a rough estimate, we say we usually take 50,000 as a cost of an individual post with on costs. It would vary, but if you take that as a kind of a median, that would be around 100,000 for 2 posts. Thank you.
Oh, you have your hand out. You're moving your hand around too much for me. Yes. Sorry, Harry.
Thank you, Duncan. And just to add to that, Nigel, if we look at I agree with the models that have been put forward in the appendix. I do agree with some of the advantages, disagree with the disadvantages and the advantages. As somebody who works professionally in the industry, you know, this is not being biased. This is something which is it's so prevalent nowadays. And I think you take the example of the rising cost in council tax. There are more people that do, as a result of increases and more pressures on the cost of living and pressures on their finances, they do claim discounts that they are not entitled to. We do have the facility with the NFI again, which is mandatory, but it's not mandatory to actually complete the matches. So we do have that sort of that availability there. To add to your point, if we were to outsource an external party to come in and do the fraud investigation work, you're looking around £35 an hour to £65 an hour. That's the average cost nationally. Now, with that, as it states in the appendix, you get all of the high-level expertise. You get any issues can be ironed out within the contracts during negotiations. And we would obviously need somebody internally to deal with that potentially in the internal audit team. I think if we look at the housing side as well, again, as somebody who works in the industry, we look at the housing list that we've got over 7,000 people waiting on the housing list. How many of those people that have applied, and this may not be liked, but how many of those people are being true to their circumstances? Because to my knowledge, we don't even check the applications. These should be checked on a regular basis to make sure that the people who are entitled to social housing are getting the social housing that they're entitled to. We talk about housing again, just to give you some figures nationally, around 5% to 8% of social housing is illegally sublet. Again, to my understanding, I think whether the internal audit guys can confirm, we actually haven't done anything under the Prevention of Social Housing Fraud Act 2013, maybe anything under the POCA Act, any UPOs which are unlawful profit orders. So I think I think a recommendation should be made, but I do agree with discussions that I've had before this committee. that potentially a task and finish group should be set up to actually explore the options and then present them to Cabinet.
Just okay.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm for anything that is going to save the council money, and I think it can have a knock-on effect, can't it? And fraud, you can maybe not only recover money, but then it can act as a deterrent for future fraud if people are aware that things are being looked at. You know, I find it quite difficult to make an assessment on this just because there aren't any costings. There's some national figures given in the original motion that came to council, but there's nothing tailored to the local situation. So I wonder whether we're the best people to actually look at this, and whether it maybe should sit, I don't know, perhaps at a scrutiny committee that could consider a task and finish. I'm not quite sure of the procedures, but I don't feel I've got enough to work on here. What I don't want to do is suggest funding a team if we don't know what the situation is in terms of the finances.
Thank you. Nigel.
Yes, there's been no evidence that there is rampant fraud within Shropshire that's going to get savings that justify a dedicated team or outsourcing. I think as a compromise, and one which could be done relatively cost-free, is that because we've had extra recruitment to the internal audit, it's given us the benefit of extra hours that internal audit have got. And within the report, it identified that there's no proactive arm of internal audit with respect to fraud. So it gives us the opportunity to say, now's the opportunity to, and the experience is there, but to enhance that experience by perhaps a dedicated fraud person and somebody else learning it, to develop within the internal audit a proactive fraud investigative using the hours that we've gained by the staff. And so, to be fair, that would be my recommendation, because they can look at it virtually cost-free, see if there's anything to be saved, and if they start finding stuff, then they can then ask for an expansion. But this is an assumption that we've got, whereas the reality is we've been cutting back year after year after year after year, and we've been making savings. We're not a massive council where there's lots of opportunities. I don't think, anyway. That's my thought.
Carl?
Yeah, I disagree with Nigel's comments. I think it's wrong to assume that there's no demand. You look at many different county councils across the country that are looking into fraud and fraud investigations, and they're making huge savings and returns on that fraud. It'd be very naive to suggest that Shropshire Council is different from them councils. So I think, yes, we need to really look into the cost of bringing in extra teams. I don't think personally the internal audit function is big enough to be able to look into these different fraud claims. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd agree with Carl's points. I think, to put it into context, we haven't had a dedicated resource since 2015. So since the previous government, there were sweeping changes in housing benefit, universal credit. Most of the people that worked here, they were actually either given the option to move to the DWP or look elsewhere for employment. Again, a good example, probably of a neighbouring authority that has got a counter-fraud team, is Stoke-on-Trent. Last year there was around £2.7 million in savings. Now, whilst a lot of those won't be cashable, a lot of them are notional. And again, if we look at the housing element and the housing side, the social housing property is brought back into stock. That's a vulnerable family that is housed, and that's a £93,000 saving for the council. You can look at the notional savings, what is actually how they arrive at that element, which is part of central government. So I do think it's a very naive point to think that we don't need a counter-fraud team. And fraud now is more prevalent than it has been. And Nigel, I'd probably say you look at the AFI 2023 report and read that report in depth, which will give some picture as to why this has been brought forward.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I didn't say we didn't need it. I was giving a recommendation of a sort of expansion of the professionalism within the internal audit to have a look at it to see, to scrape the surface and then move from there.
Just sort of comment from my perspective, I think it's very difficult to give a view on the structure. I think we can all say his report's important. I think Harry's made some very important points, which is not just financial. It's if a family is, or a person is advancing their case by putting information into their housing application form which doesn't reflect their circumstances, then somebody else is missing out, and there's a misallocation of our scarce resources. I quite attracted by the idea personally myself of having a task and finish group do further work on this. I'm just, Tim's at the back here, just not quite sure whether that would be a task and finish group for the cabinet to establish or scrutiny to establish, or us to, I don't know how that happens. I'd like Star Housing, because housing in here is managed through an arm's length company called Star Housing, to be involved in that, because they're the people who have their own processes for controlling these matters. I'm just looking for Tim, if he's, well, somebody who can advise whether we just make that recommendation to cabinet and see what they do with it, or whether it needs to go to the scrutiny. I don't know. Tim will speak, I'm sure. Come and join us, Tim. Tell us that. We're recommending it, we're not actually doing it.
Just that when this came to council, it was referred to audit committee, not overview and scrutiny. So maybe it does need to go to cabinet for them to get. Sorry. Apologise.
Sit down and join us, Tim, and then people can hear.
So yeah, council referred it here, didn't they, rather than an overview and scrutiny committee. So it does seem to me that it probably needs to go back to cabinet for them to decide what to do next with it.
And I suppose, I was confused by that decision. I know Ford sits here, but ultimately we're not operational. We can't really say yes, we should have this team or not. It's not part of our terms of reference. So it probably should never have come here in the first place, because it's an interesting suggestion, and it's kind of going
down. Yes.
It's try and get agreement to way forward. Is do we make a referral back to cabinet to say we had a report on the various options? There is clearly more to discuss in this. We need to involve Star Housing and others, and we would recommend that some sort of working party, members task and finish group, is set up to undertake that work. Would that? That's something we can all get behind.
I think so, Chair. My only fear is that the cabinet may look at the financial outlook of Shropshire Council and just potentially not even look into it. That's my only fear. That is my only fear.
Creating such a body means that there's work ongoing, and clearly it will contribute. I mean, if we can combat forward, then we have additional resources for other activities, Charlotte. Is anything from internal audit? Do you want to comment at all on this, Olivia? No?
I'd just echo some of the earlier points James made around the headline savings. They do, they are very attractive. It's determining which are cashable savings and which are projected. So an example of that is the blue badge fraud. That's not going to result in money coming back to the council, and there's not necessarily evidence that it is being misused, but the NFI in particular assigns a value to that. Thinking of the national picture, yes, there is fraud within the public sector, but it's looking at each individual area's risk assessment, and that's a process we're going through at the moment of asking all those owners of those fraud risks to update them. We're currently reviewing the Fighting Fraud Locally assessment, which the early indicators are actually the governance is there. Absolutely take the point, reduced resources, and you can always do more. It's finding the sweet spot between how much do you invest in it when you don't have the data to say, say NFI, for example, it costs about £4,000 to £5,000 to take part. We've recovered £20,000, and the majority of that is into the pension fund. So just the figures we're getting are not indicating a huge fraud risk, but it is something we are constantly reassessing and asking those service areas to think about the controls and the risks in their areas.
Which is why a working group can get into a bit more granular detail about this concept and look at cashable savings and savings elsewhere, and savings not in money but in savings of resources. So I'm happy to move that from the chair that we actually say to the cabinet that we think there is merit in further discussion on this topic, but it needs to be undertaken, we feel, by some sort of task and finish group. We don't have the power to establish that, but the cabinet presumably does, and that's what we recommend to proceed. Is a seconder for that? Oh, Duncan seconding that.
and moved it to here in the first place.
You're always fault. Now it's moved on. Okay, show of hands in favour of that. Thank you very much. I'll move the exclusion of the press and the public, I think. So I hereby move that the press and public be excluded for consideration. Date and time of next meeting. I haven't got the jam. I've lost my thrown out my laptop. Sorry, thanks for that. The date and time of next meeting will be on the 5th of February at 10 AM. We note that. And then I resolved in accordance with Schedule 12A of Local Government Act, Section 5, that the public and press be excluded consideration of the following items. Can I have a show of hands for that? Very much. And I think nearly there. So that's the first.